Today, we're going to take a look at 5 misconceptions about Linux. Let's go.
Number 1. Linux is hard to use. There's a common belief that Linux is hard to use, that you need to use the terminal, and that you need to learn Linux in order to use it. You can install Linux and just use it without learning anything about it, especially with a user-friendly distro like Ubuntu, and you don't need any terminal knowledge at all to use Linux. You can do basically everything graphically. Linux also usually doesn't require you to install any drivers for hardware, printers, etc. It just works. When you're used to a certain operating system, switching to a new one can be confusing, even if the new one is very easy to use, but eventually, you get used to the new operating system. Number 2. Linux isn't meant for desktop usage. Another common misconception about Linux is that it's only for servers, supercomputers, and embedded devices. Linux is also meant for the desktop, and it's a really good desktop experience, especially when starting out with a user-friendly distro. Linux can be used for gaming, development, servers, supercomputers, embedded devices, routers, regular use, and much, much more. Linux is for everyone. Number 3. Linux is unhackable. No operating system is unhackable, yet. Around 96% of the hundreds of millions of servers around the world use Linux, and websites do get hacked from time to time because, of course, Linux isn't perfect. Back then, an argument could be made that Linux on the desktop benefited from security through obscurity due to only having around 2% market share, but now with Linux surpassing 4% market share, not including Chrome OS and Android, which are technically Linux distros, desktop Linux is becoming more of a target, and therefore security through obscurity doesn't work. Linux is, however, built more securely than Windows and Mac OS, and has several security advantages. For example, because most Linux distros are completely free and open source, thousands of professional cybersecurity experts and members of the Linux community around the world can contribute bug fixes and security patches to Linux and different Linux distros. Also, because there's many Linux distros, all of which are constantly evolving, if a vulnerability is found in one distro, it may not affect other distros, and overall makes Linux much harder to hack. And finally, with the rise of immutable distros, and of course, better security, hacking Linux is becoming nearly impossible. But of course, Linux is still not unhackable, as with any other operating system. Number 4. Linux doesn't have many apps, and free and open source software is inferior. Linux actually has hundreds of thousands of apps available, including most apps made by big corporations, and the Linux version of a certain software is usually not worse or better than the Windows or Mac OS version, because it's the same software, just for a different operating system. And if an app you want or need doesn't support Linux, there's almost always a great free and open source alternative that gets the job done. Also, free and open source software is not inferior to proprietary software. For example, there's many professional free and open source apps, a great example being the video editor Kdenlive. Great free and open source games like ZeroAD and SuperTextCart, and Blender 3D and OBS are both great examples of free and open source software being the industry standard. Number 5. Linux isn't for gamers. Linux has thousands of games natively available, including big names like War Thunder, Minecraft, SuperTextCart, Counter-Strike 2, ZeroAD, Dota 2, and tons of others. And tens of thousands of Windows-only games can be smoothly and seamlessly run through compatibility layers in programs like Wine, Proton, Lutris, and DXVK. Also, gaming on Linux is growing rapidly and becoming better and much more popular. For example, with Valve's Steam Deck, which runs an immutable, gaming-focused Linux distro called SteamOS.
Subscribe if you like my content, and join the PenguinByte Discord community with the link in the description below. Thanks for watching, see you next time.